FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is January 16th, 2017. Just 4 days till Donald Trump assumes the presidency of the United States. And there's so much excitement going on, although the left is still collectively holding their breath. They don't know what to do. How could this happen? Well, it's going to happen, barring any force majeure. And John Rubino is with us for our Monday morning chat. John, good morning.
Morning, Kerry. Yeah, you know, Obama is still president.
Are you sure?
Would you never know it from the news?
I think he left. I think he left. He's in Hawaii. Wasn't he playing? Last time I saw him, he was on the golf course. Wait a second. Every time I've seen this guy, he's on the golf course.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, he went back to the office long enough to order troops moved to the Polish border.
Yeah, well,
but that is about all that's happened lately.
Good place for them.
But, you know, Trump gives new meaning to the word hitting the ground running, because the guy, you know, he gets elected. He's got
tweeting the ground running. He's
already started governing via Twitter.
Yeah.
The latest is that he called NATO obsolete, said he'd be happy to break ties with Germany. And then he demanded that German car makers build cars in the U.S. or face a 35% tariff on imported cars. And Angela Merkel, the president of Germany, came back and said, well, why don't you guys build better cars? It's already, you know, he's picking fights with the main leaders of the rest of the world, with the exception of Putin. So fascinating transition process here, and completely unlike anything we've ever seen, because there's this generally held way of doing things during the transition from one administration to another, where the incoming president doesn't step on the toes of the sitting president, because, you know, and they say this, there are clips of these guys saying it to reporters over and over again, that there's only one president. And so, you know, back when George W. Bush was the incoming president, he said, yeah, I'm not going to say anything about foreign policy because that's not my role as the incoming president. We have a sitting president. We need to speak with one voice to the rest of the world. And then Obama did the same thing when he came into office. And Trump just tore that playbook up. Well, he started making pronouncements via Twitter at 4 o'clock in the morning.
There's a little difference here. They've tried to take the guy out. That whole fake news thing.
Oh, yeah.
We won't even get into that. You know, Obama has boxed him in, making last minute federal monuments. I mean, regulatory dumps. Everything he's doing is geared at making Trump's life more difficult. So if Trump fires back a few tweets at him, let it be. If he's going back head to head at Obama, it's because Obama's thing is he's not saying anything, and he said stuff about Trump, but not too much derogatory stuff. But it's all passive aggressive stuff that's going on. So Trump's calling him out, and let it be.
Yeah. In domestic affairs, I'm actually not sure how it worked in domestic policy with previous transitions, but I know in foreign policy, this is a big break with the past, where it becomes an issue of debate between a sitting administration and the incoming administration, you know, where they're both throwing stuff out there. So it's just interesting and, you know, unusual historically, and more contentious than we're used to, and more confusing for people in other countries. So I think the world is riveted to this. And one of the things that I think is really interesting besides that is that people thought once Trump got elected that the campaign would be over and that he would try to become more statesmanlike. In other words, that his advisors would sit him down and say, okay, now here's how you do it when you're actually president. You know, you say it behind the scenes first and you work things out diplomatically, and then you guys meet and you shake hands. And he didn't. He just stayed himself. He just kept on tweeting at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Well, he's got no patience for any of the niceties here. It's like, I got a job to do. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be alive to do it. And I'm impatient as hell. I don't like excuses. I have no patience for political BS. And I hate government. So I'd like to get rid of as much of it as possible. And that seems to be his attitude here, which actually, when you get down to it, pretty healthy, you know?
Well, we'll see. I mean, you can't run a government by decree and by, direct attacks from the president on specific companies. That won't work in the long run, but it's interesting to see in the short run. It's got to be translated into coherent policy where the rules apply to everybody evenly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I would be all for antitrust laws applied to the big banks, which break them up, and also to a lot of big companies out there where, the media is controlled, or 90% of the U.S. media is controlled by 6 corporations. And that's just crazy. I mean, that's a recipe for a distorted media picture for the average person, just as having most of the financial economy controlled by a handful of big banks is a recipe for distortion of the monetary system. So if one of the things that come from this, for instance, the media battles with Trump, is that the next administration applies antitrust laws to media ownership and says, okay, from now on, you can only own 5 newspapers or 3 TV stations or something like that, some relatively arbitrary but still hard limit on how much media one company can control. I think that would be cool. We'll see if it happens. But and he's mad enough at the mainstream media to break with tradition and take the chance to do something like that.
Yeah, bust them up. I mean, they're the corporate controlled media. They have no interest in the country, in the well-being of the average person. They've got agendas, and their interests are in furthering the corporate agenda, the corporatist agenda.
Kerry, I tend to think you get captured by your environment to an extent too, and that these guys don't actually think aren't actually aware that they're screwing over the average person, whether you're Jamie Dimon running JP Morgan Chase or Rupert Murdoch running his media empire, whatever. They think that what's good for them is good for everybody else.
Yeah.
And so they actually think they're doing the right thing by and large. Maybe they're playing hardball in a lot of cases, but overall their success translates into success for the rest of society in their own minds.
Yeah.
And that's normal human behavior, that we tend to identify with our own situation and consider it to be normal for other people. And so they aren't in their own minds necessarily evil, but a lot of what they do translates into evil for the rest of us. So yeah, this would be a great time. See, we're kind of in a lot of ways back in 1929 to 1935 or so. We've taken on immense amounts of debt. We've allowed huge concentrations of power and wealth to evolve, and the system doesn't work anymore. And we're ready for a gigantic financial crisis. And one of the things that came from the Great Depression was aggressive antitrust enforcement, where we broke up the big banks and the corporate trusts that worked with the big banks to manipulate markets, and we kind of atomized the system where there were more medium-sized players and fewer gigantic players, and that worked really well all the way through the 50s and 60s. Before we started allowing these big concentrations of wealth to take place again. So if we're going to have a replay on some level of the 1930s, then antitrust ought to be part of it. We should be breaking up these big corporate entities and scaling back the government, which would be that would be a break with the past, because in the 1930s, government began to grow from a relatively small base. This time around, we need to apply antitrust to the government as well as to the corporations, because basically we have these power centers that are really part of one organization. But the big banks, the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, Congress, Senate, the White House, a lot of big corporations, they're all part of one thing right now, So to apply antitrust to one segment of that would be an imperfect solution. You got to go across the board. We need to scale back the size and scope of the federal government at the same time that we're breaking up the big banks and the big media conglomerates.
Absolutely.
Whether that happens or not, that's kind of a utopian pipe dream, but some of it will probably happen going forward, just because there's such a unanimity of public opinion right now that it should happen. So it would be easy for Trump to push stuff like that through.
Yeah, it's got to happen. This concentration's the worst thing, and it really makes the population feel alienated and just bad economically. It really is. It makes these big companies, they're just fixed in place, so they don't have to be efficient, they don't have to be innovative. They can just buy up new, smaller companies that are innovating. So it saves them having to have an R&D department. They've gotten really lazy, and it needs to change for sure. So
this ties into something else that's really interesting, Kerry, is the trend towards governments via their central banks buying up all the financial assets in the world. Japan and Switzerland are already huge buyers of equities. Japan owns a big chunk of its domestic private sector now via the central bank buying equities. And people are talking about the ECB and the Fed doing the same thing, probably in the next recession. When they run out of bonds to buy, they'll start buying stocks. And see, that's an even greater concentration of power in the hands of the federal government, because they'll be big stockholders of the private sector. And if they were already partners with the big banks and with the defense contractors and big pharma and the big media companies, wait till we see what happens when they're not just partners, but part owners.
Voting members.
Yeah. Vote. Yes, they'll be voting their proxies at stockholder meetings. And you know what they'll be saying behind the scenes? They'll be saying, "Oh yeah, okay, listen, you need to build a factory in this congressman's district because we need his vote on this other issue." It'll just be this,
you need more transgender bathrooms in your factories and more lesbians. You got to go recruit some lesbians here. You don't have enough, right? It's going to be PC, all this stuff. It's just going to be a nightmare. You could just see it coming, right?
Well, depending on who's making the requests, I wouldn't see Trump making that kind of request, but he would make some other ones that we would find objectionable, probably.
Like bring the production back to the U.S. and right?
And build a statue to Donald Trump at the entrance where the factory works. So we could see a lot of crazy stuff happening.
He's an egotist.
And the point is that when you allow these kinds of concentrations of power to happen, it inevitably corrupts the people who have that power. It's not that they're starting out as evil. It's that they're being handed the ability to just say, "Oh, don't worry about the Constitution, just do what I tell you," and get away with it. Right. And you and I would also be corrupted by something like that eventually, because that's human nature.
Yeah.
That the more power you have, the less cognizant of right and wrong you become. Mm-hmm. And that's really that's the world we've created, and it's not over. Unless we slam on the brakes right now and do some serious antitrust across the board, the next recession is going to see us buy up the private sector as an expanded version of QE, because we won't have anything else to do to stop a depression from happening. So there is possibly one more iteration that you and I would consider really bad, Gary. And the part of the scary part of this is that a lot of people on both the left and the right would consider it good. I think Paul Krugman would have no problem with the government owning most of the shares of big corporations and then running those companies according to, public policy dictates. In other words, what's good for quote unquote society is what these companies should be doing, as defined by liberal college professors and career congressmen. And that wouldn't be a good thing for the rest of us either.
No. Where's the market fit into that, right? Where's the free market fit into that
that's
one?
That's the thing. Yeah, these guys don't really understand why we're as rich as we are, or why we used to be as rich as we are before we started borrowing all this money. And that's because we were a market-based system. You create wealth when everybody's acting, in their own interest and voting with their pocketbooks and voting with their capital. And in the aggregate, that ends up producing efficiency. In other words, we make stuff very well and very cheaply when we're all making decisions as part of a market rather than as part of a bureaucracy from the top down. And that's the thing we're sabotaging now, because the people who have been running the government for the past 30 years, by and large, don't understand this. So they look at the marketplace as an ATM, where you go and you get the money that you need to do the real work of society, which is, government programs and stuff. And so eventually that ATM will run out of money if you just keep taking from it and not replenishing it. And that's what's happening now. So we're borrowing more and more money every year and not creating enough new wealth to pay the interest on that new debt. So we have a huge crisis out there when interest rates go up, or when people lose faith in fiat currencies, or when stock markets tank and the government can't step in fast enough to stop it, or any number of other things. And it'll be a direct result of the mistakes that we made over the past 30 years by not respecting market mechanisms and sabotaging the price signaling function of the major markets of the world.
Yeah. Well, you can just feel that it's coming. And one thing we didn't talk about is all these Goldman Sachs ne'er-do-wells that are high up in the Trump administration, at least as far as economic policy goes. Now, Mnuchin, as the Secretary of the Treasury, at least he hadn't been at Goldman Sachs for 17 years. He had a hedge fund. But the other guys, the head of the SEC, Goldman, and Council on Economic Advisors, Goldman. I mean, everything's coming up Goldman. What does that tell you here, John?
Well, it tells us that the original plank that Trump had inserted to the Republican campaign platform, which was to bring back Glass-Steagall and in effect break up the big banks, turned out to be something that for whatever reason, we're not going to see anymore. That is completely over, because can you imagine the conference table with those guys sitting around it with Trump, and Trump saying, yeah, I think we should reimpose Glass-Steagall. We need to break up these big banks. And all of these guys look at each other and say, this guy's an idiot, and they'll explain to him in very simple terms why he can't do it. And he can, conceivably go ahead with it anyhow. But the guys he put in charge of doing it, in other words, the Treasury Department and Council of Economic Advisors, the guys who actually have to implement something like that, would see that as hurting their friends, and they wouldn't do it. So we're not going to see Glass-Steagall reimposed. We're not going to see the big banks be broken up while these guys are in charge. So I think he told us something really important with his nominees to the big cabinet posts and the subcategories of the cabinet, because it's clear that the big banks are going to be in charge of finance policy going forward, which means they'll get bigger, they'll take bigger chances, and when and if it blows up on them, they'll engineer another big bailout. So I think it's almost a lock that during the next recession, as I said, we'll start buying equities. And the reason we'll do that is because equities are the product of Wall Street, along with bonds. We've already bought up all the bonds and pushed bond prices up to record levels, which has made a fortune for Wall Street banks. And a knock-on effect of that is that stocks have gone way up too. But when stocks go down next time around, we'll see the guys running the Trump administration's financial arm engineer a huge bailout of Wall Street via a huge purchase of equities with taxpayer money. In other words, they'll just create a lot of new dollars out of thin air. They'll buy stocks with it, push the stock market up, and in that way, keep the big banks solvent. And it'll be us on the hook for that. Carrie, you and me and all of our friends and everybody else in the U.S. that's a taxpayer will have to make good on that bet at some point in the future when stocks go back down. So, I have to say I'm amused by what's going on, but not optimistic.
Are you surprised
about the direction of public policy? And in any event, we've already done the damage. We've already borrowed more money than we can ever pay off. So there's really nothing the government can do.
You're
at this
really
point.
surprised, though, John? You're really surprised.
I'll be really surprised.
Are you surprised by the appointments?
No. Well, actually, I didn't have any expectations because to me, Trump was always this wild card. So since I had no idea what he was going to do, then whatever happens is just, okay. That's an unusual thing that's happening.
Look, he's out to rescue the system. He hasn't said that this system sucks. It's corrupt. It's failing. We need a new system.
But you can't rescue something.
You can't rescue it.
Is this deeply in debt?
Yeah. So you and I both know the system can't go on. He's saying if only we had more growth, everything would be wonderful, right? If we can grow at 50% a year, we could just pay off everything. But you can't grow at 50% a year. You can't grow at 10% a year. If he could grow at 3.5% a year, that would be pretty downright miraculous in the current malaise that's going on. And it's almost become a zero-sum game where that 3.5% growth is going to come at the expense of another country, right? So where's that going to happen?
The only thing that we can do now is to devalue our currencies one after another, which is what we've been doing. The dollar was really weak for a few years, and then the dollar spiked, and the euro and the yen went down, and so we can go back and forth with that. And one side take a bullet for the team while the other side benefits a bit. But that is also, like you said, a zero-sum game that they can't go on. It ends at a certain point when people just realize that's what's happening and bail on the currencies. So, what we might be doing is substituting a currency crisis in the future for a financial crisis today by buying up all the financial assets with newly created currency. We can do that as long as people will accept our currencies, all the new money that we're creating. But once people lose faith in the money that we're creating, then we don't have the ability to keep buying financial assets, and then it all falls apart. So that's something that the timing of which is impossible to predict. But how much longer can it go based on the numbers? Because the numbers are just gargantuan right now. If you look at, for instance, total debt to GDP, for anybody in the world, any major country, it's off the charts compared to any other point in history. So we are completely in uncharted territory right now. And the idea that there's a solution using traditional means, in other words, borrowing a whole bunch of money and spending it as a way to get the economy going, that won't work anymore because we've already borrowed so much money that if interest rates were to go up to normal levels, which is, if we return to normal, which is the goal of expansionist fiscal and monetary policy, interest rates would then have to go up to historically normal levels, which would bankrupt every major country in the world. And unless you consider Russia a major country, because they're not so deeply in debt. So they wouldn't be bankrupted by it. But Japan, China, the US, and most of Europe would all just evaporate financially if interest rates went back to an average of like 6%. So we can't ever get there. And the guys who are like, Paul Krugman and a lot of Donald Trump's people both saying, we'll just borrow $1 trillion new and spend it on infrastructure. they both groups
they're a little naive.
Don't understand the environment in which they're doing it, apparently, because, borrowing more money at this point is just throwing gasoline on the eventual fire.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a limit to how much money, and borrowing means printing here. Let's face it. Borrowing doesn't mean, we will just go to the bank and take out a loan. This borrowing is euphemistic for printing up more money, inflating the currency, and hoping for the best, right? Correct?
Well, hoping that people will still take the currency after you create it.
Yeah.
And so far, that's been the case. But at some point, it won't be. History is pretty clear on this. There are dozens of experiments historically of countries trying to create a whole bunch of new money as a way to achieve prosperity or to keep it together, and it never works. It's never worked in human history. And the fact that the whole world is doing it now is what's unique about this.
Yeah, concerted effort to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be one country at a time. France or the Roman Empire or Great Britain or somebody would try something like that, or Germany in the 1920s, and they would blow up. But it would be in a context of everybody else using gold and silver as their money and being just fine. And this time around, we're all fiat currency countries, which means we're all going down this same road of borrowing too much and creating too much new currency and just hoping it works out, at least until I retire from the Federal Reserve and go off with my big pension, and then my successor will handle the problem. That's what everybody's hoping now, that they just get through the next election cycle, or through their 3-year term, or whatever. And some of them will, most of them have in the past.
Yeah.
So, but at some point, there's going to be a group of people that are caught.
They're going to be left out
in the system when you don't have a chair when the music stops, and they're the ones who are going to be the Herbert Hoovers of this generation. We'll remember that Fed chairman and that president for centuries as the one who presided over the greatest financial crisis in human history. And that's coming. I don't know when, but it's felt imminent for quite a while, and it still feels imminent. So I think more than likely we just won't see it coming when it happens. It'll feel bad out there, but not unusual. And then boom, one day things will start blowing up and the world will change.
And maybe we'll even be a little euphoric. We'll think we've gotten through it. We dodged another bullet, and then boom, we'll get hit square before the eye, between the eyes.
I mean, that's what a lot of people think now. I mean, who's buying equities right now? Who is terrified the way you and I are?
Yeah.
And the people who are doing that are the ones who think, well, you know what? The Fed will get us another 5,000 Dow points, and then we'll sell.
Yeah.
So for the next 6 months, I'm going to behave as if I'm euphoric, because we've got at least 6 more months of expansion before everything blows up, and I'm going to milk it. I'm going to get that performance bonus.
Go for it.
So that's the money management community right now. And soon, if governments in the U.S. and Europe start buying equities, they're going to just buy across the board. So they're going to buy as if they think everything is going to go up forever, because they're not even going to do security analysis. They're just going to say, okay, I'm going to buy equal amounts of the S&P 500.
Yes.
Weighted for market cap, and so that's going to not only push everything up, but it'll also erase the differences between well-managed and badly managed companies. So there goes the price signaling mechanism. So we'll have a euphoric spike in equity prices when everybody starts following the Fed in this, and we'll have valuations just cease to mean anything. And that's a pretty good prelude to a crash.
What can possibly go wrong, right?
Yeah.
What can possibly go wrong? Everything is good. We're living in the best of all possible worlds, right? Somebody once say that?
For the next 6 months, if you're a money manager, you can behave that way at least.
Yeah, well, but in the meantime, the market, the Dow still hasn't broken that elusive 20,000 resistance, I should say, mark. When is that going to happen,
Who knows? Because equity valuations, because they're related to a depreciating currency, don't mean anything in nominal terms. Like if you look at Venezuela's stock market, it's been going way up But that's because the currency in which they value their stocks has been going way down, and so the same thing is happening in the developed world, where we're depreciating our currencies year after year, and then asset prices in the financial markets go up year after year. And you think, if you just look at the asset prices, if you just look at the stock market, you think, wow, this is a golden age. But what's really happening is that we're just changing the measuring stick. And stocks are not getting more valuable in the sense that the companies that issue the stocks are doing better. It's just that the dollars in which we're measuring those stocks are becoming less and less valuable in relation to financial assets year after year. And so when that process accelerates, we could see Dow 100,000 easily. Sure. But it would be because the dollar has gone down by 70%, and so in real terms, you might be losing money in the stock market, but it'll look like you're making money. And which is not that different from today. That's sort of what's happening right now.
Good point. I think we'll leave it at that. Anyway, check out John's work at dollarcollapse.com and check out our work at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for a newsletter. Any questions, comments, criticism, feedback, just shoot it off to kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. John, we will catch you next week. Be well.
Thanks, Kerry. See ya.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Step on the toes of the sitting president, because and they say this. There are clips of these guys saying it to reporters over and over again, that there's only one president. And so back when George W. Bush was the incoming president, he said, I'm not going to say anything about foreign policy because that's not my role as the incoming president. We have a sitting president. We need to speak with one voice to the rest of the world. And then Obama did the same thing when he came into office. And Trump just tore that playbook up. Well, he started making pronouncements via Twitter at 4 o'clock in the morning.
There's a little difference here. They've tried to take the guy out. That whole fake news thing.
Oh, yeah.
We won't even get into that. Obama has boxed him in, making last minute federal monuments. Regulatory dumps. Everything he's doing is geared at making Trump's life more difficult. So if Trump fires back a few tweets at him, let it be. If he's going back head to head at Obama, it's because Obama's thing is he's not saying anything, and he said stuff about Trump, but not too much derogatory stuff. But it's all passive aggressive stuff that's going on. So Trump's calling him out, and let it be.
Yeah. In domestic affairs, I'm actually not sure how it worked in domestic policy with previous transitions, but I know in foreign policy, this is a big break with the past.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is January 16th, 2017. Just 4 days till Donald Trump assumes the presidency of the United States. And there's so much excitement going on, although the left is still collectively holding their breath. They don't know what to do. How could this happen? Well, it's going to happen, barring any force majeure. And John Rubino is with us for our Monday morning chat. John, good morning.
Morning, Kerry. Yeah, Obama is still president.
Are you sure?
Which you'd never know it from the news.
I think he left. He's in Hawaii. Wasn't he playing? Last time I saw him, he was on the golf course. Wait a second. Every time I've seen this guy, he's on the golf course.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, he went back to the office long enough to order troops moved to the Polish border.
Yeah, well,
but that is about all that's happened lately.
Good place for them.
But, Trump gives new meaning to the word hitting the ground running, because the guy, he gets elected. He's got
tweeting the ground running, or tweeting the ground running.
He's already started governing via Twitter.
Yeah.
The latest is that he called NATO obsolete, said he'd be happy to break ties with Germany. And then he demanded that German car makers build cars in the U.S. or face a 35% tariff on imported cars. And Angela Merkel, the president of Germany, came back and said, well, why don't you guys build better cars? It's already, that he's picking fights with the main leaders of the rest of the world, with the exception of Putin. So fascinating transition process here, and completely unlike anything we've ever seen, because there's this generally held way of doing things during the transition from one administration to another, where the incoming president doesn't